Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Responsible Edge podcast with me, Charlie Martin, co-founder of the Anti-Greenwash Charter. Join us as we learn from experts on how to build a successful and ethical business. So today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Sammi Gower. Sammi, now the partner at a company called Pollen, co-founder and partner, which is a sustainable growth consultancy working on both reporting and communications when it comes to sustainability. So had a really interesting conversation with Sammi today around an article from BCG looking at the impact of sustainability initiatives on investor value and expectations. And Sammi had some fantastic sort of practical advice to offer us based upon the work that she does at Pollen with clients around how to go about identifying sustainability initiatives that are not only going to be impactful from the sustainability perspective, but ultimately be aligned with the commercial value and strategy of the company itself. So really interesting in terms of looking at sustainability through the lens of, ensuring that profit and value creation is at the heart of the decisions that we're making too. So just want to say a big thank you to Sammi for joining us today. She was absolutely fantastic guest, and I think we've managed to convince her to come back on, but we'll see in the future. I just want to say thank you to you guys for listening in. As always, any questions, comments for either ourselves or Sammi, please do get in touch. Enjoy the show. Sammi, thank you so much for agreeing to give us some of your time this morning and join us on an episode of The Responsible Edge. I know about you, and I'm done that. We've been through LinkedIn, and we've all had our initial conversations and stuff. But we'd just love to kick the conversation off today by hearing a bit more about you and your background. Now, just to say in terms of how far you want to get back, we literally have had guests who are like, let's talk through the first inspirations at the age of 5 and 6 and 7. We've had others that maybe keep it a little bit more concise and clear around kind of, their professional career, etc. So feel free to start wherever you see fit.
Perfect. Okay, well, I won't go back to 5 years old, but to give you a bit of a very brief history, at uni, studied biomedical sciences, always thought I was going to be a doctor, but wasn't very good at making concrete decisions. So I decided to do a bit of a halfway house. And then I think luckily for me, realized that the thought of actually working in a hospital wasn't what I wanted to do. So then I thought, let's try an office. And I literally mean an office. Like, there was no more clarity around that. I just thought, let's go into an office and see if I like it. So I ended up going to New York for a few months, working at a marketing company, and basically learned that, yes, I like office life. So let's try this. Mm-hmm. So after uni, I loved it. I wanted to go back, had a load of good friends there. So just took a temporary job working for who is now my co-founder, who we'll get back to. But I was an assistant in a recruitment company, really loved it, was just having a really good time, was there for a few years, and then kind of got to a stage where I was like, okay, I need to kind of do something else with my life. Let's figure this out. I was doing a kind of pre-MBA course at the time. So I was like, I'm going to quit my job, do my exams, and then I'm going to have a think and I'll figure it out. That happened to be COVID. So I ended up having a bit longer to figure it out than was initially planned. But I took a job in private equity and worked there for a short amount of time in the end. But while I was there, I actually joined what they called their kind of ESG task force, I think. And this was kind of my first entrance into sustainability in terms of the corporate sense. And all we really did there was buy a load of carbon credits, which is the most obvious thing to do with a company that has lots of money, not the most inspirational sustainability strategy. But it kind of got me thinking about businesses and sustainability and how that's kind of where all the power and the money is, and that the emphasis on the individual to fix this is kind of unfair when really, in a way, we're dictated to by these large organizations that are kind of producing the products that we buy and figuring out how we get around the world, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of got me onto that idea. So I thought, okay, this is really interesting. This is something that I think I could, be really excited about, want to work in. So I started thinking about that and ended up at a sustainability consultancy called Centeo, which I had a really good time at. And that was basically my foundation of learning about sustainability and business, and mainly worked in strategy. So doing strategies for large cap organizations, things like how can we bring sustainable products and services to market. And then also working on some coalition work. So looking kind of cross-sectoral systemic issues. How can we collaborate on massive things like, how we're going to make renewable energy work, or how can we make EVs work, and where do we put the charging points, and all the different companies that are involved in those kind of big issues.
Hmm.
Um, and then coming back to my now co-founder, he was kind of my mentor ever since I left, and so we'd have regular catch-ups, and he was at the time thinking of starting a new business. So we were talking about that, and it was more centered around pre and post investment consultancy. So when you're looking to get investment, how do you get your house in order? And then once you've got that capital, how do you deploy it in the most effective way?
Hmm.
Um, and I kind of came in with the sustainability angle, which is like, okay, well, both of those things, thinking about sustainability now is kind of mandatory. You can't really get investment now without someone asking you questions about sustainability. And when you are investing that, if you want to set your business up for long-term success, again, you've got to put sustainability into those decisions. And he
Yeah.
very quickly came around to that and was like, I think you're right. And now fast forwarding about a year and a half, um, sustainability is basically all we do. So we're now just purely focused on sustainability as a value creator. And
Hmm.
of course, that's to do with investors, but also, competitive advantage and attracting the right employees and all the things that we'll, I'm sure, talk about today. But that's how we got here.
Sammy, that was, and I do wax lyrical about most. A lot of our guests are very good at doing this, but that was so brilliantly detailed enough, and but pitched in a lovely way. And I feel like we got some real clarity around your experience. I've got a load of questions though. I have to dive into things a little bit. So
Sure.
I know that you mentioned biomedical science, thinking about going into a hospital and then choosing to go into an office, which I
Yeah.
just think is just there's something just brilliantly simple about and open and honest about that. But marketing, what was it? Was it literally I just want to go and have an office experience, or what was it about marketing that kind of drew you to having that as your first office experience?
It was actually more New York than the
Okay.
marketing side. So this was between my second and third year of uni, and I really wanted to get some work experience, but I also really wanted to travel somewhere I'd never been before. And finding someone that would pay me in New York turned out to be extremely difficult. And this was just the first company that said yes. So that's as much of a decision that it was. But it's quite funny because now actually we do a mix of strategy and comms. So it's kind of come full circle in a way, but I'll definitely say I'm not a marketing expert, and I don't think I ever will be. So I'm very glad that I've got team members that actually know about marketing.
And did you? It's super interesting because that was as you were describing it, I could see all the kind of PE, marketing, sustainability, ESG, etc., and then almost like the packaging together of all of that experience, and then it kind of spits out, if you like, pollen and what you guys are
Yeah.
doing now. So it's like, there's some real method to. You're pitching it very much as this has just sort of all happened, but I think you can very clearly see these different elements sort of influencing one another. Big question for you. Did you always know that you wanted to run your own thing? Was that always a kind of a driver post maybe realizing that hospital life wasn't going to be for you?
You know what? Actually, the opposite.
Okay.
The first company that I spoke about joining was, I think, probably about 4 years old when I joined. And I was working for my boss, who was one of the co-founders there. And it actually, although the company was doing super well, it was a great place to work. Watching what the founders had gone through to get it to that stage looked awful. I just said, that looks like so much work, so much pressure. And kind of as an assistant, you actually get a bit of an insight into what it's like to be, in a C-suite level, because you're literally reading everything they do. You go to all their meetings. Like, I was very kind of hands-on in terms of seeing everything that went on in his life and his role, which is such a good learning experience because you're basically a fly on the wall of
Mm.
someone that's 20 plus years ahead of you. And to me, it just seemed like this horrible amount of pressure on them. And I just thought, you know what, I'm really happy supporting someone else doing that thing. But then when we started Pollen, I joined a bit after it had begun. Omar was already doing bits and bobs. And initially, again, I was like, you know what, I'm very happy for kind of Omar, you run the show. I'm here to support you. I'll do the client work, I'll do X, Y, and Z, like we can do the sales together, whatever it is. But then gradually that kind of shifted. And I think it's also a confidence thing as you start doing things and things go well, and then you do something else that you couldn't imagine yourself doing. And that happens a few times. Suddenly your ambitions, I think, get a bit bigger,
Mm.
and you start to have a bigger idea of the things that you can achieve. And somehow over that year or so, it actually shifted to, like, I really want this to be my thing, and I'm really passionate about it, and I want the pressure, and I want to be able to, I want to, like, have to pay people's wages, and you know be responsible for the business succeeding, all of those things. But it was a definitely kind of a slow journey to get there. And most founders, I think, from the start, they always say, I never want to work for anyone, and I always wanted to start my
Mm.
own thing, and I can't imagine having a boss. Whereas I was actually so happy with that. I love learning from people. Sometimes, like, having a bit of a lack of that now is just a position I never thought I'd find myself in, because I really kind of relish that, and that kind of
Mhm.
mentorship that you get from people. um but no, it was a slow shift, but I'm now definitely enjoying it.
I think, oh, this is totally, and I do this because I always get fascinated by the stories of the people. But before we get on to the nature of what we're actually going to talk about today, but let's go with it. So that is really, I think you're absolutely spot on. Like almost all the people that we've had on that are founders of business, it is the same. I was like 10 years old and I set up the lemonade stand outside the front house and
Hmm.
I sold a few lemonades and I thought, yes, this is me. This is what I need to do.
Exactly.
Um, but to hear it from the other end, what influence, this is a difficult question to answer perhaps, but what influence do you think you coming at it from a different sort of experience, a different angle is going to have or has had on the way that you lead the company? Is there a nuance to the way that you approach things because of that kind of different avenue towards being the leader?
Yeah, I think so. I think because I don't need to feel like the leader. I'm very
Mm,
happy, for example, like members of my team to lead on whatever they want to lead on. And, for example, if we want to bring in a much more experienced, more senior person than me into the business, I'd absolutely love that. I love, like, learning from other people, and giving them responsibility. And I think maybe people who always have seen themselves as, like, I'm a CEO figure, I'm gonna run this business, and kind of probably a bit more like star of the show type people. Like, I'm quite happy being like an operations person, someone who's in the detail, and someone else can run the show, and that's fine. If it has to be me, that's also fine. I don't mind doing it. But I think maybe that's a slightly different outlook of, it's not about me. And actually,
mm,
one of before I joined Pollen, when it was more investment focused, Omar wanted to call it founderless, because his
mm,
his thinking behind it was basically that a startup shouldn't be about the founder. A startup should be a business that can work without the founder. And if you've got the right structure in a business, and the right revenue coming in, the right clients, the right people, the founder should be able to step out of that business and it be just as successful as if they were still there. And I think that mentality is kind of still in our business. Like, it shouldn't be one person that's running the business, and if they leave, it's all ruined.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Founderless. That's absolutely, that's genius. And do you know what really strikes me with this? And again, we've met each other on a couple of calls now, but
Mhm.
and I know using this term in like a commercial context is like sometimes a bit icky, but there's a
Mhm.
humility to thinking that way. That there's so much which is like the founder story and like the almost the ego trip, if you like, of like, let's learn more about this visionary person that's putting this thing together. And I think you can
Mhm.
see the like, I don't know, the egomania in it often.
Mm.
That might be too strong a term, but I love that. I love that idea that there's that humility at the heart of Pollen, which is like, essentially, we're gonna bring in the right people to do a great job, and we're gonna give them the autonomy and the confidence, if you like, to go ahead and have an impact. By the way, that's me just spitballing away. Super interesting. I love it. Um, we're going to obviously go on to the article, but also thinking about Pollen and thinking about your leadership style and thinking about how you want this business to develop. Can you just touch on, when you obviously we're on the Responsible Edge podcast here talking about ethical and responsible business practice, like what
Mhm.
does that mean to you? Like when you think about ethical and responsible business, like why what impacts you when you think of that? Like what draws you into particular areas of concern or consideration when it comes to, what you're doing?
Mm. Well, I mean, I think the obvious high level answer to that is that there's profit, people, and planet, which is like that classic triple bottom line. But I think what people probably don't get in this ethical part is that profit is equally as important as the other two.
Mm.
And people sometimes shy away from saying that, but businesses are there to make money. And if you don't make money, you can't pay your staff wages, you can't treat them well, you can't give people a good quality of life. So that's, I think, always supposed to be the core of a business and shouldn't be forgotten. But equally, if you're not making people's lives better, whether that's your staff or the communities that you operate in or the people in your supply chain, and if you're not thinking about the environment or the world that is literally supporting your ability to have a business and do what you do, no matter what you do, even though, we're a consultancy, we're people based, it's not like we're using any raw materials, but at the end of the day, if our climate is, all the things that are happening, we won't be able to operate in the way that we're operating now. We won't be able to grow and scale and grow abroad or whatever it is that we want to do in the future. So I honestly think it's those three pillars, but thinking about them genuinely equally, to have a successful business that is inherently responsible.
And just to touch on, and I know we're going to crescendo talking about pollen more specifically, but just to take that in mind, like, can you describe for our listeners, like how, just an example of how that thinking influences or has influenced the way that you guys are going about developing pollen?
hmm Well, I think firstly, it's about setting up processes right from the beginning. So things that we do for our clients as well as for ourselves is report on all of these things, sustainability metrics as well as financial metrics, and making sure that from the very beginning, we're still a very small business, so it's not that hard for us right now. But if you set up those processes now and you think about those metrics equally, then as you grow and scale, you'll keep that mindset and you'll actually have the numbers to back it up to understand, like, yes, we're on track, and yes, we're going to hit XY target, whether that's financial or environmental, a carbon target, a diversity target, whatever it is. um, so I think that's the first thing. And then I also think, as we're a services based business, it's all about our people. So just making sure that, like, people that work for us are happy, they're getting enough money, they're getting enough holiday, trying to do things like 4.5 day work week. It was initially four, and then you get a bit busy, but like, trying to do those things again, they're not always easy. And especially as we have our clients, and if they want to do something on a Friday afternoon, probably going to say yes. But trying those things and figuring out, okay, what does work for us as a business, what doesn't. And also, I think having a bit, I always think it's important to just treat employees like adults. So,
Mm.
we've got unlimited holiday, and I trust that if someone's got loads on their project, they're not just going to take holiday. So it's like things like that. It's just trusting the people that you work with, and treating them not like kids with all these rules. And then obviously on the environmental side, it's just things like not traveling when you don't need to travel, not flying unnecessarily, which makes such a big difference, and just keeping on top of those things. And then finally, working with clients that we want to work with, that we know have the right intentions, that we aren't just taking their money because they want to give it to us. And that doesn't necessarily mean not working for hard to abate industries, or the industries that are the bad ones, because obviously I believe that um, they need help more than anyone else. So it's not necessarily like, okay, we're just not going to work with that person, but it's probably, do they really care about sustainability? Do they just want to, and I'm sure we'll talk about greenwashing, but are they just trying to do the bare minimum to get them out of a sticky situation? Or are we actually going to create value here and do something really good? I think that's more of the criteria that we think about.
Super interesting. I'm gonna. There's so much I can pick out of that, but I want to pick out the people element,
Yeah.
and actually ask you, like, how, again, thinking about your founder experience,
Mm.
how easy is it for you to apply that same sort of thinking to yourself? Like, often we literally had a show a couple of weeks ago talking about founder burnout and how we go about mitigating that. Like, what's your experience of that as a founder?
Yeah, I mean, I would actually say that watching burnout, or either previously having happened or happening. And
Okay.
so that was probably an eye opener in terms of the fact this is a real thing now, and people talk about it much more now than they did a few years back. But I think, I mean, my my housemates will tell you that I am often, at my laptop at 9 p.m. But also, if I have a holiday planned, I will do everything in my power to not look at my laptop on my holiday and not let that holiday be cancelled because something's small. And I think there's just always that decision-making process in your mind of, is this worth it? And also, is this the end of the day? And sometimes other people have to remind me, this isn't gonna, like, the world will continue, you'll be fine. But I think in general, I'm quite good at thinking, like, this is an extremely busy time for me, so I'm just gonna work really, really hard. I'm not gonna have social plans this week. I'm gonna sleep as much as I can and work as much as I can. But then, and the nice thing about consultancy, when we think about the client side of things, is that projects are kind of cyclical, and you have really busy times and then you have quiet times. And I think what it is in the quiet times, which I'm learning to get better at, is actually have a quiet time and work less, maybe take a half day because you're actually not that busy that day, and you can do something tomorrow. And those things I think are really important. And that's why the flexibility thing and actually staying true to that is really important, because I don't expect the people that work for me to be at their desks 9 to 5. If they want to go for a run at 11, or if they want to finish early and go for a bike ride, so they'll start early, whatever it is, I need to be able to trust them that they'll do the work if it needs to be done. Otherwise, again, that's like even more on your own plate of like, oh God, are other people doing their work? And if you can't trust that, then that's just going to be a disaster. So I think it's trusting that other people will do it as well, and then not feeling guilty when you do it for yourself.
I love it. I feel like, and again, I know we were only sort of 20 minutes into our first show, but I feel like we could honestly have a series with Sammi. It would be called Series with Sammi on the Responsible Edge. And like the next one would be like recruitment, retention, like how we all look into that. Because I think you've got some really clear and really sort of sound thinking in that area. I want, though, we are going to not be able to even get to the article that we're obviously focused our initial conversation around. So let's jump onto that. Sammi, if you wouldn't mind, can you just start by giving our listeners just like a synopsis, a brief summary, kind of introduction to the article that we shared with you? I think it was the BCG piece, and maybe just sort of crescendo by pulling out any of the kind of key, most salient points that you kind of felt like, oh, actually, that's a really interesting point for a further reflection.
So what the article was talking about was business leaders feeling that they weren't getting the recognition from investors that they were doing things in sustainability. And I think the hypothesis of the author was that the sustainability initiatives were kind of more checkbox initiatives, and they weren't necessarily linked to kind of corporate and business value. So what they did is they looked at a load of companies, I think mainly large cap organizations, looked at their sustainability initiatives and assessed them for the business case. They had various criteria for assessing that, and then looked at the market's reaction to those initiatives. And they basically found that the ones that were linked to business value did do well, and investors recognized them. And normally, they'd actually sell for a higher price if you're talking about a sale. And those that had any form of greenwashing actually decreased the value of the business. And then those that were just kind of doing a checkbox exercise and said, like, look, we've done all this ESG stuff, investors didn't really care because it's not really relevant to them. It wasn't really about value creation.
That was absolutely perfect. I mean, I've literally got a crib sheet up, like sat here with a summary, and you pretty much the closest to verbatim we've had so far. Sammi, just to really clarify things for, obviously listeners can go ahead and engage with the article through our own piece and read it themselves. But just so that we're absolutely like clear on this, like when the article referred to those sustainability initiatives and strategies which did have that kind of that additional value, if you like, corporate commercial value at the heart of them, and that there was a strong business case for that sustainability initiative. Can you just give us like a few examples in maybe your work with Pollen, or perhaps those featured in the article, of where organizations have done that? Just so that we're all clear on what we mean by those sorts of initiatives.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the key thing to think about is this in your sphere of influence as a business? You know, like, is a sustainability topic relevant to you at all? You know, like for example, if I'm going to go do a sustainability initiative about our supply chain, which is basically non-existent, what's the point in that? And is it linked to kind of core business value? So there's a few really nice examples which if you look at kind of large companies and it shows this in a nice way. So if you think about for example, Tony's Chocolonely make chocolate bars. What they do is they really tend to their supply chain. They make sure their farmers are paid a fair wage and they train them in the best ways to grow their cocoa beans. And from that, Tony's then get great supply relationships. They've also got a really consistent supply of really high quality cocoa beans, which means that their chocolate's nice, which means that people buy it. So that's a really nice, clear example. And then a different one, for example, is if you think about MasterCard, they do a load of social value stuff. And one of the big things that they've done for a long time is get the unbanked banked, which basically means people that don't have a bank account, get them a bank account. And that's a huge way of bringing people out of poverty and just like into the world that we all live in now, and gives them get access to, you know, so many things that they didn't have before. But then also at the end of the day, more people have a credit card or have a debit card, which is MasterCard's whole business. So, you know, it's these examples, and almost people might say, you know, well, they're just doing that to make money then. Well, that's great. That's perfect, because if a sustainability initiative isn't going to make your business money, it's the first thing that will go if you need the money back, or if you decide to do something else with that money. Like if it's a CSR initiative on the side, no, you know, the first thing that goes wrong, that's going to go. Whereas if you make sustainability core to what you do, and it helps make you money, then you're never going to stop doing that.
And it's brilliant. It literally brings me back to, and I made note of it, your brilliant sort of comment earlier of profit is important too. And I think that,
Yeah.
that very much lends itself to this. It's like, yeah, we can do something really positive for people and planet, and we can make money from it too. So why,
Mm-hmm.
you know, almost that question of like contention over like, well, hold on a minute, you're making money from this thing. It seems so odd to have those things at odds with
Yeah,
one another.
exactly. And people almost thinking that it's ingenuine because you're making money from it. It's, you know, these are businesses. And I think sometimes people shy away from talking about the money side of it. But that's why these things exist.
Exactly. Can I ask you a question? So you use that brilliant example, you know, the example, the counter example of, you know, Pollen thinking about supply chain and thinking about doing initiatives within that space. Like, if you're working with a company and you're beginning, and let's say that company is sort of looking for Pollen to kind of help restructure, I guess, the whole like sustainability strategy for the entity itself. If
Mm,
they, if you if you were to identify a number of areas where it didn't feel like it was an area that you could have much influence on, and it wasn't very core to the business's operations itself, what do you do about those areas? Because you still do have an effect, don't you, when it comes to the way that you as a business engage with those? Like, but what do you do with
mm.
them? You switch your focus presumably to those areas, as you've alluded to, that are more core to your business that you can have an effect on. But what do you do about all the other stuff?
Well, I think the important thing is to prioritize, right? So we
Mhm.
do something called a double materiality assessment, which I can go into if you'd like to, but it's basically a method of prioritizing which topics in sustainability you should pay attention to. And it's
Mhm.
got two lenses. One lens is, will this affect my ability to make money as a business? Which was traditionally the only way that people looked at sustainability, more as like a risk factor. And then the now newer way is, what's my external influence on the environment and society? And what you do is you speak to the senior business leaders, but then you also speak to their customers, employees, partners, investors, anyone in their ecosystem who, you know, has anything to do with their success as a business. And then you get all of their opinions. And through that exercise, you prioritize what's going to help you do well as a business, and also what your stakeholders care about, which in effect should help you do even better as a business if you start looking at those things. But as you
Mhm.
said, then you've got your prioritized topics, but there's also other things that you can't ignore. So I think as well, like when you're thinking about sustainability, if this is an investment, so this is an investment that you hope will pay off. So I think what you've got to do is invest heavily in those topics that you've prioritized, but then you can't just ignore everything else, because as a bare minimum, you need a social license to operate as a business.
Mhm.
And if you ignore everything else and you're doing really good stuff over here, people will find that out, and all of the good stuff over here will not get you the value that you've hoped, because your reputation's tarnished by all the other things. So I think it's in some areas, just don't do it badly.
Mhm.
Just like be, as you say, a responsible business, but then really invest in those areas that are really important to you.
Super interesting. It aligns almost perfectly with what the article asserted as well, in terms of, obviously, I think it was more focused on, if we look at all of the sustainability initiatives and we consider which ones will most likely have an impact from a commercial perspective, that those are then rewarded from an investor
Mm,
perspective, which makes so much sense. But it was interesting seeing
yeah.
it borne out. Do you think that there's still value in an organization? This is a leading question based upon the work that we do at the Anti-Greenwash Charter and some of the stuff that we're working with clients on. Do you think that it's still important for organizations to at least acknowledge, through some sort of public forum or some sort of policy or some sort of declaration, those areas that, look, we know that we have an effect on the following, but they're not the priority areas where we can have as bigger effect as others, and we have to decide where we're focusing our
Hmm.
attention, our resource, our investment, etc. Is that a fair proposed way that an organization approaches all the other stuff?
100%. I mean, with all of this, complete transparency is absolutely crucial, because at the end of the day, sustainability, one of the best things about it is it actually makes people trust you as an organization. And as we know, trust is at an all-time low with businesses, with governments, like you name it. And so to get that trust, no one's going to believe you just talk about all the really good stuff that you're doing. Like, you've got to talk about everything. And also, even in the things that you're trying really hard at, talk about where it's gone wrong or where it's difficult or where you've fallen down. Because if you do that, no one's going to kind of judge you for just not being good enough. If you're trying
Mhm.
really hard, you haven't hit that target and it's because of this reason, and you've told people, it's much better than just not telling people and hoping that people don't realize that you've not hit the target or you've not done the thing that you said you'd do. And equally, I think the whole, I mean, this, I think for me, this is where sustainability reports come in, because
Mhm.
that's your one document that shows, number one, the whole process that you've gone through to get to where you are, the methodology that you've used to prioritize the topics, why you've prioritized them and deprioritized others, and then what your plans are with the ones that you do set targets for, and the roadmaps towards hitting those. And I think if you lay all of that out and it's public, anyone can read it, you've kind of got that to fall back on if you're talking about this really fun initiative that you've done, and you are doing a really good job on it, and someone says, wait, but you've not done anything here, and you can say, well, yeah, exactly, I spoke, that's in our report, we deprioritized it this year because of X, Y, and Z. And it's just about being open about these things. And sustainability has been around for a while, but it's pretty new in terms of people really paying attention to it. Even in
Mhm.
the past 5 years, it's dramatically increased. So everyone's learning, no one's doing it perfectly, and the ones that are, it's tricky because people are scared about getting shot down by saying the
Mhm.
wrong thing, which is why I think it's so important to just give the full picture, and then you've got something to kind of fall back on if someone is trying to attack you for something.
Would you say, and again, I'm putting words in your mouth here, so feel free to just say, Charlie, that's absolutely not what I'm saying, but it's almost like the ultimate, obviously the article mentioned greenwashing and mentioned like the impact of that from complete kind of obliteration of value across the kind of
Mm.
from an investor's perspective. And therefore the problems associated with it. Is it too simple to say that essentially the ultimate anti-greenwashing strategy is just complete, bearing it all, transparency?
Yes. um I think in short, yes. I imagine that that will be a difficult thing to ask of businesses in reality,
Hmm.
but ultimately, yeah. I mean, there was a great example of Oatly, which has been through lots of ups and downs, and some people still very much anti Oatly. But what they have done really well is they made a whole page which was all the bad things that people have said about Oatly, and it's a web page. It's up there now. You can go look at it. And then they've also spoken about, they do address when people come at them for certain sustainability things or claims they've made, And yes, they're not the perfect example of a sustainable company. They have definitely made mistakes, but the fact that they're head on, as about like what these people say, they address it head on. It's made their case more compelling, and I think
Mm,
it's made people like them more and trust them more when things have gone wrong. So yeah, I would say if you can be totally transparent, that is the best way to go about it.
mm.
But big businesses, it's difficult to kind of ask them to do quite that.
And again, like, feel free to we can edit this out if it doesn't land particularly well. But and again, excuse my absolute naivety if this is a very naive question to answer, but
Mhm.
why is that? Why is that the case? Why can't we expect big businesses to be, truly open and transparent about, the way that they operate, the impact that they have, et cetera, et cetera?
I think the honest answer is they're all doing things that wouldn't come across well and don't have a good explanation. Or the
Mm,
explanation is this just makes us more money.
mm,
And although I genuinely think people would respect it, the leadership in those organizations is not likely going to see that as a good idea.
mhm,
And I also think that that's another point towards this, in that the people that are leading the large cap organizations of today, some of them are sustainability conscious, and then you get the IKEAs and the Unilevers that have actually transformed their business through sustainability, and are the exact perfect example of the kind of companies we're talking about. um, Others are not, and they see sustainability as a cost, as an annoyance, as something that they need to do the bare minimum to get by and just keep making money as they're making money, and hopefully someone will fix the climate crisis over there. And those businesses will
that
never
was
be
such
fully
a good
transparent.
nutshell. Sorry, sorry. You took me. Go. Sorry, you
No, so
mentioned you.
yeah, that I think that's why. But
Okay.
the more disruptive, newer organizations, all the organizations that truly see this as a value creator, I think there's no reason why they shouldn't be fully transparent.
Yeah, yeah. I guess, as you say, as we have more and more cases of examples of companies, reflecting back on the BCG article, that are successful from an investment perspective and from a value creation point of view, the more the
Hmm.
case builds, et cetera, et cetera, the more undeniable it becomes. Um,
Hmm.
Let me ask you, we've spoken about those sustainability initiatives that when you look at an organization, and as you say, you do those material assessments, you identify that they're maybe not the areas to focus on. Wanted to
Hmm.
switch focus in from your perspective onto those areas that you do identify as being, okay, this is where we can really kind of have an impact.
Hmm.
And these are the sort of opportunities that we have for real value creation. Again, thinking about your experience at Pollen and like how you guys go about like working on this, like what talk us through like a typical example of identifying one of those initiatives, and then what you then do to go about kind of enacting upon it.
Hmm. Well, firstly, these are always extremely business specific. So it
Mhm,
depends on what type of business you are, and your business itself. But if you take kind of a general lens, what you tend to find is, if you're a B2C, you want to be looking at what your consumers are looking for. And yes, you still need to compete on quality, on price, on convenience. That's never going to go just because something's sustainable. We're not at that stage yet. We might never be. But if you have sustainability as an additional factor on some or all of your products, you're likely to outcompete now. And that's the number of people that care about this and are making purchasing decisions off the back of sustainability is growing, growing, growing. If you're a B2B, if you're not already mandated to report on something on sustainability, the companies that are bigger than you that you sell to probably are. So
mhm,
again, it's a competitive advantage in terms of fitting into their sustainability strategy and what they need their suppliers to do. And then, internally, if you're a services business, your employees basically are exactly what they are, your business. So that's always going to be a really important thing to think about. And you know, employees now, like, people want to work for purpose-driven organizations. They want to feel value out of what they do. They want to feel valued by their employer. So, attracting and retaining the top talent, if that's something that's really core to your business doing well, then you want to think about your kind of internal social sustainability factors, and what you're doing there. And, also things like diversity, and equality. And then separate to that, investors, this whole article was about investment and attracting investment. If investment's really important to your business, or you want to be acquired, for example, then you need to think about the factors that investors are looking for in businesses. So it's really that it's communicating with those stakeholders, understanding what they value, and then also internally how you create value as a business, and trying to marry those two up, and where you find an example that something's going to help you make more money and do better as a business, and it's going to, there's like a sustainability initiative in it. I think that's how you figure out, like, these are the ones that we're going to prioritize.
So it's sorry, Sam.
No, you go.
Right. I was going to say, and again, you talk about these things in such like eloquent simplicity is how I would describe like your style. It's like no, honestly, it's you need to add it to the bill, because this is fantastic stuff for us to be thinking about in terms of the work that we're doing and the way that we're building our business. But essentially, it's looking for those win-wins, isn't it? It's looking for opportunities where we realize commercial value, and equally there's a sustainability outcome associated with it as well. So you've identified these opportunities, and we've got these kind of win-wins, and we can think about like, okay, great, we can achieve sort of both sides of the coin here. Talk to me a little bit about like how we go about analyzing the impact of those initiatives. What you mentioned about the sustainability reports that obviously are created, but can you talk us through like an example of how you would advise like a client, like, guys, we've identified this as being a key sustainability strategy, and this is what we would therefore suggest we do in terms of metrics and kind of the data-driven approach to, being able to feed back, etc. on this. Just give us a flavor of the sorts of things that you would advise clients to do.
I think a key thing is treating these initiatives like you would any kind of financial initiative, or any way of the way that you kind of track that you make money in a business or new form of marketing or whatever it is that you're doing, is treat these exactly the same. So you always need your metrics, and quantitative, qualitative, just make sure that you've got some form of reporting going. So you've set your target, and there's loads of great sustainability softwares out there now. A lot of work, we work with a few of them with our clients. And I think what's really important is you've got this goal. Normally, sustainability goals are quite long term. So what you want to do is break that down. And what we do is we create roadmaps all the way up and from now to 2050, when you've got your net zero goal or whatever it is. And what you want to do is you want to break that down into loads of mini goals across the years, and then KPIs and metrics that are indicators of the fact that you're on track. And then just literally track as you go. Are we on track to hit this? But then also what you want to do is these kind of sustainability metrics, you want to be measuring and reporting alongside your financial metrics, so that it's not like financial reporting's over here, sustainability's over here. We do our sustainability report in May, but our year ends in April, and like it's all over the place, and you think of them as two separate things. You really want to, as much as you can, think of it as the same thing. And just as you would, the reason that we are a strategy and communications agency is that, in my last job, we'd do some amazing strategies for these businesses, and you'd catch up with them 6 months later, and you'd be like, how's it going? They'd be like, we absolutely love the deck. People read it all the time. And it's like, well, that's great. I'm glad you send it around to your colleagues, but has anything else actually happened? Do these products exist, or whatever it is that we've been doing? So the reason that we have communications is the other side of that, is that you need to tell people about what you're doing in order to actually get the value from it. And that needs to be tailored to whichever audience that you're trying to influence. Is it the customers? Is it the investors? Is it your employees? Whatever that is. There's obviously loads of different ways you can do that, but then you would kind of measure that campaign as you would any almost marketing campaign. And what's difficult about sustainability is it's not that easy to kind of draw a single line of thread from, I did this sustainability initiative and now I've got more customers, or now my employees are happy, or this person's come to work for me. Because like a lot of things, it's slightly difficult to fully quantify, like if your brand has just improved, it's difficult to put a number to the value of that. Or you don't necessarily send a survey out to everyone who's bought your products and said, did you buy this because it's sustainable or not? But what you can see is long-term trends. So you can look at your retention rate, or you can look at your sales, or whatever it is that's the metric that's kind of tied to this sustainability initiative, and over time has that improved. And yes, you probably would have done some normal marketing or some normal like innovation in your products or whatever it is alongside it. But I think those kind of long-term trends are what you should be looking at to kind of see that this is working.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, that we got often get kind of tasked with like, can we provide some sort of direct, return on, for example, signing up to the Anti-Greenwash Charter and the likely kind of commercial outcomes associated with it. It's so nuanced, it's so multifaceted, it's really difficult to kind of go, well, you're going to get X, amount back from this. So I think that's a really, really valid point. And I suppose if you're reflecting on the whole of the conversation that we've had, if you're able to do that kind of really clear thinking up front around your strategy and around pinpointing these areas that are those win-wins and opportunity to kind of really provide value, both from a sustainability perspective and a commercial point of view, then actually it's about kind of having that kind of clarity in place and then being confident and committing to it over a long term, having those kind of metric feedback elements in place, but ultimately being confident in the strategy work that you've done up front. Is that why, from your perspective, kind of from a Pollen point of view, getting involved with an organization kind of upstream to really help them kind of set that sustainability agenda confidently, that's a kind of key part of the work that you guys do?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the earlier you start doing this as a business, the easier it is, because obviously retrofitting all of these kind of different ways of working is difficult. And also it's tricky because the way that we've worked as businesses over now so many years is quarterly reporting, and purely financial metrics. And so this is a shift in mindset and a shift in a way of doing things. And it is difficult because we still work off a quarterly system. And so, it's not easy. And the way I'm saying it maybe sounds like, just do this and you'll make more money and all this stuff. Like it's an initial investment, which should pay off in terms of making more money and also saving costs and there's loads of possible things, but it will take time. And you do need to kind of bring everyone in the organization along on the journey as well. Like there might be some cultural shifts that are needed internally, especially if it's a really big business, for people to understand, like, you need to think more long term in your targets, even if you kind of link a sustainability metric to people's bonuses or whatever. Like that is a shift in a mindset of people thinking this isn't like just a side part of my job, this is now a key part of what I do. And so there's lots of little ways that you can internally try and kind of shift the narrative of how to think about this and get people into that more long-term mindset. But it's not something that will happen overnight. And it's also something that needs to happen, in our whole society and across all of our global markets, because it's not the way that people think now. So it's no quick fix. But I think people are starting to collectively realize that there is value in this. And also what's better is it just makes you feel good. Like I did some work with Shell, and a lot of the people who work at Shell have kids, and their kids are on at them every evening when they get back from work saying, why do you do what you do? And, worked with people worked with some people in their renewable team, some people not in their renewables team. And you can see that they want to feel good about what they do every day. But it's a tricky thing, because you can't also say that, we don't need oil and gas, because our societies would crumble. And so people are very quick to vilify people on the wrong side of sustainability. But it's a whole shift, and it's a shift that we've never seen before at this scale and at the speed that we need it. And so I think you need to kind of understand that it's hard and recognize that it's hard, but see that the value will come, and you just need a bit of patience and a bit of long-termism to get you there.
And a bit of, I love this, that Sammi, there's almost like, there's a few things running through my head, but there's almost like this sense of like, we need to nurture everyone to move along this road, and dismissing and having this polarized, think of our broader kind of, societal norms, cultural norms, everything's so polarized, all opinions are so cutthroat in terms of versus, one versus another. Actually, when it comes to sustainability, that won't do, because what we need is everybody to, even if they're just starting the process, even if they're just beginning to engage, at least they're on the journey as well. So it's almost like, we need to kind of find that reverse, if you like, of the cultural norms we're experiencing in terms of polarization, to say, no, we're all
Mhm.
collectively part of the solution here. Would that be I've
Exactly.
rambled on there, but would you agree?
No, I totally agree, and I think people can be really black and white about it, and it's actually unhelpful.
Mm.
I mean, calling, if we're thinking about businesses now, calling businesses out that are doing the wrong thing is still important.
Hmm.
And, litigation, when people have really done something wrong, is still important. We need to deter people from doing that. But also, as you said, just understanding that we need to bring everyone along on this journey, and some people will be more willing than others. But I just don't think you should just like close the door on certain businesses or certain people or certain points of view, because that's not going to help us get there. I think you need to be kind of sympathetic to the fact that people have maybe worked in a job their whole life and that's all they know, or people don't understand sustainability and maybe don't want to. Maybe they want to bury their head in the sand because it's all too much for them and it gets overwhelming and depressing. So I think it's just kind of understanding that person's point of view and not being the annoying person around the dinner table harping on about sustainability, but maybe just saying it and like slowly bring them over, and try and
Gently,
convince, but in a
gently.
nice way. And maybe don't be too focused on like the extremes of climate change and trying to shock people into doing things, but maybe I think there's more kind of positive news stories coming out. And I know, like, I now on Instagram try and follow like the accounts that are talking about all of the new innovations that are happening and all of the new ways we found to make energy in renewable ways and whatever it is. I think the positive news is probably an easier way to bring people along on the journey than the negative.
Sammy, it's almost as if you like planned it perfectly, because that kind of crescendos, I guess, and actually plays back into the article that we've kind of focused a little bit of our conversation around today, in terms of looking at sustainability through the lens of, we can still have an outcome relating to profit here, if we manage
Mm.
to align our sustainability strategies initiatives to the core value of the business and the strategy of the business itself. So love that. We've crescendoed and pulled that together. Lovely. As expected, we've rattled through the kind of recording time that we normally set aside for an episode. So, as mentioned at the beginning, would love to kind of crescendo with your two questions really, because we're
Mhm.
asking two questions now. With your kind of magic wand, if you were to kind of see, a change in the commercial world that was related to responsible and ethical practice, what would that change be? And sort of a second question, if you like, that would be good to get your take on, is thinking about your younger self, thinking about biomedical science, Sammy, back in those days, thinking about going into hospital. What would be the kind of key number one piece of advice you would have offered, younger Sammy, as you stepped out into your career? No, they're quite different questions, but perhaps take the first and then we'll dive into the second.
Big questions. The first one, if I had my magic wand, I think the thing that would make such a huge difference, and it sounds simple, but if every big decision in a business was made with that kind of triple bottom line point of view that I said in the beginning, just profit, people, planet, if those three things were thought about in every decision making process, I think we'd be on our way to a good place. And I'm not saying that every decision has to be the right thing for all those three things, but if it's just part of the process that you consider it as a bare minimum, I think that would make such a huge difference quicker than we think. So if I had a magic wand, I would just wish every business leader, anyone with influence, would do that, and I think we'd get somewhere.
I love
In
that. Here,
terms of
here.
yeah, um, not as easy as it sounds. In terms of my younger self, I think what I would say is do the thing that you want to do, not the thing that you think you should do. Because
Mm.
it sounds, again, kind of sounds very obvious, but I think I spent a lot of my career thinking, what should I do? And what's going to, be the most successful thing I can do, and what's the best decision to do here. And as you know, as you've seen in this conversation, my decisions kind of like quite black and white, and I could be quite erratic with them, or I can spend years over them. And so I think changing the lens has really helped me, because now I love what I do. And I think if you bring passion, or if you genuinely enjoy what you do day to day, you'll be better at it and you'll do well in it. It doesn't mean you have to go for the best career that's got the trajectory, which, I'll end up here, or whatever it is that you prioritize in your life. I think if you kind of bring energy and enthusiasm to something, you'll ride through and you'll do well in it. And also you'll be a better person to be around.
Mm.
And I think, especially in something like sustainability, which can be a really hard area to work in, it can be depressing. Sometimes you just feel like, you're just fighting this impossible battle. If I didn't enjoy it, I think I would just cry every night, because it's hard and people are fighting against you, and it feels like you're losing a lot of the time.
Mm.
Even when you've got your small wins, and then you see a government's made a certain decision, and you just think, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would say make decisions off of what you want to do, not what you feel you should do.
Can I just on that, which I think is a brilliant, obviously piece of advice. And I love both responses were brilliant. We need to get you a magic wand so that you can, actually have these kind of influences. Would there almost be an argument with your second point about, do what you love, do what you're passionate about, to not think too long term? Is that a fair comment? Because I think for me, I look at a lot of people certainly thinking about like that kind of long term, corporate professional vision they have for themselves. Just make it simple. Like we all ultimately in the service based industry ultimately end up in doing lots of different things. The majority of us just run with
Hmm.
what you're passionate about and what you care about at that particular point in time, and that will lead you in a meander towards wherever you need to go. Is that me being reckless, or do you think that's a fair?
No, I couldn't agree more with that. I think that's so crucial, because you don't know what's going to happen in 2 years' time, no matter what decision you make, if you go one way or the other. And if you don't enjoy what you do, I've always said that I will never, work a job for 2 years, because it will be a really good experience. I'll hate my life, but then I'll get to X, Y, and Z,
Mm,
because that means the only thing that's guaranteed is you'll be miserable for 2 years. You might never get that job at the end of it, or the company that you want to work for goes bust, or whatever happens. You literally don't know. So all you can control is if you're happy now. And if you're not happy now, then okay, you might go through a bad patch for 6 months or so. I'm not just saying quit your job if you have a bad day, but
yeah, we're
but like
just to be clear, we're
overall,
not condoning that. Yeah.
yeah, no, this is still, give it 6 months. But if you're not happy now, and you can't see yourself being happy in your current situation, then I don't think there's any point doing it, and you're probably doing a bad job, realistically. So yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with that.
Sammi, this has been brilliant. We're going to get dangerously close to an hour-long conversation for this particular episode. So I'm just going to say a big thank you for joining us today. We'll definitely try and convince you to come and join us for another episode, because it was a really interesting conversation. I, for one, have learned a lot. I've taken loads of notes. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me.